Evening, everyone. Tim Addict. The sound is going to be a bit off. That's my voice. It's not the computer. It's not the Zoom. If there's any crackling which is other than medical, then do let me know. So we're on to steps 8 and 9 now, and one could speak about these steps endlessly. But what I want to do is just pull out some major points, particularly those points that people fall down on or get tripped up by. So we have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. Now, the people you harmed are scattered all through the step 4. And nowhere in the step 4 does it ask you to separate out specifically those people you harmed in the midst of all of the other behaviours and feelings. So yes, the list is there, but it needs to be separated out. And now this isn't in the big book, but I think it's very helpful to approach a step 8 in this way. Sometimes people do a step 8 and they say, this is my list of harms, and it's not. You start with the list of the actions. Don't presume at the beginning that an action was harmful. You list the action which is, as it were, a candidate about which we're asking the question, was it harmful? And you say to yourself, well, some things are always harmful. If you punch someone in the face or take their creme brulee and eat it without permission, then it's very clear one doesn't do those things. Most things, however, an awful lot of things on the step 8 are context dependent. In other words, the thing is wrong because of specific factors. And also, there are things that we do which cause other people. Do excuse me for just one moment. There are things we do which cause upset. For instance, if you break up with someone, you're going to cause them upset. But it's not the wrong thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Excuse me. I keep thinking I'm going to sneeze and then I give it the opportunity and it runs away. Um, there are situations where you cause upset. You dump someone, you refuse them a job promotion, you criticise their work when it's your job to criticise their work, and they're upset by this. But perhaps they're right to be. You haven't done anything wrong. So the step 8 list should be a list of things I've done wrong. And we start with the action. If it's not self-evident why it's wrong, I must demonstrate why it's wrong, usually with reference to the principle I've breached, and then an indication of who suffered and how. If no one suffered, yes, it was wrong, but there's nothing to make amends for. And as with the other steps, you can do the step wrong by not doing enough of it, or you can do the step wrong. Here comes the sneeze. There we go. Hopefully that's the end of that sneeze. Maybe another one will come along. But one can over-egg the pudding with steps 8 and 9 and run around rather self-righteously making amends for things where no one was harmed. Don't do that. You've got enough to do. The next point, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Now, if one understands the principle behind why one is making amends, then one doesn't need to horse trade or negotiate over individual ones with the question of willingness. Now, the reason one needs to make amends is because one has decided to live life on the basis of doing God's will, and that entails living morally, and that entails cleaning up a mess when you create one. So if you've signed up to those, I'm afraid you've already signed up to making amends. It's no good bleating that you don't relish the idea of making a particular amend. It's done on principle. And sometimes people think, well, I don't want to make amends to so and so because they're a dreadful person. Well, the fact is, I was a dreadful person, but I would have felt very ill used if the bank refused to give me my money when I put my cash card in the machine. It would be no good for the bank to say, well, we're not going to give you the money because we've judged you morally and we don't think you're good enough. Clean up your act and we'll give you your money. I'm not in a position to judge anyone else and say, well, I shall make amends only when they clean up their act or demonstrate they're good people. It's universal. It doesn't matter what harms they've done to me. If I've harmed them, that's the end of it. Now, the next paragraph, we're on to page 77. And I've got a few lines. If you go to the blog, the lines are highlighted there. You can see which ones I'm going to pull out. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. Now, the reason why step 9 does this, first of all, if I'm to be of service to God, I need to be in conscious contact with God. If I've harmed people, I'm going to be running away from God, because God, in my ego condition, appears to be the endless punisher of things. So all of that guilt for the unmade amends is going to block me off from God. But secondly, if other people don't trust me, then I can't be of maximum service. There was a situation many years ago where I made amends to someone, and I wrote, they were in AA, and I wrote them a couple of notes and they ignored the notes. And then I saw them at a meeting and I thought, oh Christ, I've got to do it in person. They haven't responded. They're there in front of me, bold as brass. I went and apologised. Now, a funny thing happened. There was a newcomer next to the person, and I shared at the meeting. And the new person, I discovered afterwards, said to the woman I'd made amends to, is he okay? And she'd said, yeah, he's okay. And that person then asked me to sponsor them. If I hadn't made that amend, I don't think the lady would have said, he's okay. The little newcomer might have got quite a mouthful about the things I'd done. But the amend was just timed right so that the answer would come to the newcomer, this person was okay. And I worked with this person for a number of years. God bless them now, wherever they are. Our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. And we've got this idea, I've missed a paragraph. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasise the spiritual feature on our first approach. Now, sometimes people are given a script for step 9, and I suppose that's better than nothing if the person is likely to make a complete hash of it because they're unable to be spontaneous or say the right thing on the hoof. Then a script is better than nothing. And it may be different in America. But in this country, if you say, I'm an alcoholic and I'm working a 12-step spiritual program and one of those steps is to make amends to people I've harmed, you're going to get an off response. A friend of mine took that approach to someone and they said, you're doing a spiritual exercise, are you? To all the people you've harmed. Where am I? Number 47 on the list. They literally said that. The British, if I may speak for the whole nation, of which I'm only barely a part, I think the British don't take well to insincerity. Even if the sentiment is good, if it's not direct and straightforward, they smell it and they don't like it. There was a thing about Walmart and how, when you go into Walmart and you get greeted in a very particular way and asked if you found everything and so on. And Walmart completely failed in Germany, and one of the reasons why is all of this scripted repartee with the customers went down very badly, and they went to Aldi instead, where people were rude to them because that was what they were expecting. I quite like Aldi, I have to say, and I also like Walmart, but I'm not your usual British person. My observation is the British want you to be a little bit embarrassed about what you've done, certainly not a self-righteous prig going around doing something that almost no one except people in recovery does, which is to apologise for something. So one should, I think, look a little bit embarrassed about this. I know it says we don't crawl before anyone, absolutely, so one doesn't want to go all Uriah Heep on people, but one certainly shouldn't lead with spiritual discoveries. Some people say, well, I make the amends for me. Well, don't let them know that. You may be doing it for you. But in the same way that when you put your cash card in the bank ATM, if the bank said to you, we're not paying you this because we owe you the money, it's because we think it's good for our, image or something. You'd think, no, you owe me the money. I had an incident, actually. I don't want this to be a series of complaints about companies, but here's another one. I got done by a car hire company in America. There are many, so you won't guess which one. They had, when you return the car, sometimes they say, oh, you just go straight on into the terminal, we'll handle the paperwork. Don't believe that. What they'll do, they'll add on a £600 charge for something you didn't do. Get it signed off before, make sure you've signed, and that's the end of it before you go into the terminal. I've learnt that lesson. Anyway, I, of course, complained, and Amex helped me out a little bit with this. I complained, and they eventually reversed the £600 or £700 charge for something I hadn't done. And they said, because we value your customer and we think customer service is very important, we're going to reverse the charge. And I didn't write back, but I wanted to say, no, you should have reversed the charge because you were committing fraud. That's the reason for reversing charge, not some great act of generosity. So me making amends is not some great act of spiritual generosity. It's doing the thing I should have done 20 minutes or 20 days or 20 weeks or 20 years ago. We've done two things wrong. We've done the thing wrong, and then we failed to make amends for it. I asked my other half, do you ever feel guilty? And he said, no. I said, why not? He said, I clear up my mess as I go along. So we should be, as it were, doubly ashamed. We're doing this because we owe people. And anything else is subsidiary to that. That's as far as they're concerned. Now, it does say, when it will serve any good purpose, we're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. So you've got to sound out the person. You've got to get a sense of who you're dealing with. Now, if I did things when I was drinking or using, and it's very clear that the behaviour was linked to drinking or using, it's a jolly good thing to say that you're in recovery, because this lends your amend credibility, especially if you've been an apologiser and a manipulator via apology. The fact that you're in a formal process, I think you can mention that at some point, as I say, to indicate that you're serious about this. This is not simply you trying to wheedle your way back into someone's good books. Also, the good purpose is they may be able to help others by referring that person to you, and I have had that happen quite a lot of times, actually. But you've got to get a sense of who you're dealing with. Once, I think I may have mentioned this in a previous talk, I had to make amends to the human resources department of a very large organisation I worked for being hoity-toity about something or other over a period of months with some, you can imagine the letters I wrote, dear me. I mean, I was very proud of them at the time, but I'm not proud of them now. Beautifully worded, but poisonous little things they were. Anyway, I said, following a script, and please let me know anything else I've done that may have harmed you, and or let me know how this has affected you. And you know what the woman said? This head of HR, this big organisation, she said, we're trained to deal with people like you. Now, this is not the point at which you say, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I'd done whatever I'd done stone cold sober. If you leave the amends not in their good books, don't start advertising your membership of CA or AA or let alone Al-Anon. Now, next point. Yes, we go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Now, the basic format for the amend is you say, I'm doing this because I owe you an apology for what I've done. This is what I did. I regret doing it and I was wrong. Those are two very helpful things to say. You don't not say you're sorry. It's fine to say that. The book even suggests saying sorry. Sometimes people try to make some sort of academic distinction between an apology and an amend. I think an amend can go further than an apology, but they're not distinguished. It's like saying alcoholics and addicts are two separate categories. An alcoholic is a type of addict. Um, uh, an apology is a component of an amend. So whatever is customary to say in an apology, you can say in an amend. I'm very sorry for what I did. Is perfectly reasonable. Sometimes people are instructed not to say the word sorry at all, and I've never followed the logic of that. So you say what you did, you express regret, you ask if there is anything you can do. Now, if it's self-evident that there is nothing you can do, because let's say, you set fire to their hair and you can't make their hair grow back, if there's nothing you can do, don't offer it as an empty gesture. It's only if there is something you can genuinely do that you ask that. And now, one thing, especially in intimate relationships with people who are touchy, the fact is, in your step 8, you probably only touch the surface of the things you did which upset them, rightly or wrongly. It's very difficult. One does one's best. It's got to appear to the person that you've done your best. But it's absolutely fine to say, and you know what? I'm ham-fisted with this sort of thing. I'm a knucklehead. I miss a lot. I've done this as best as I can. If there's anything else I've done, please have at it, tell me, because I want to express regret for those things as well. And sometimes it's 15-20 minutes before they're done, and they just rattle it out like a machine gun. They've made a memorandum of it. Someone I know made amends to a parent for some financial stuff, and he said, I borrowed and taken a lot of money from you over the years, and I just want to express my regret, and I'm willing to pay it back, although I know it's going to be impossible to calculate the exact amount. And the father said, au contraire, I have a ledger. And he got the ledger out and recited each of the amounts one by one, which extended over 20 years or so. So don't underestimate the other person's good memory, particularly if they're an Al-Anon, who hasn't been going to their Al-Anon meetings. They'll have a list. And 11thly, they'll say, under no condition do we criticise such a person or argue. Now, you might say, well, what if they accuse me of doing things which I absolutely didn't do? Well, if you literally didn't take the action, then if it's a serious thing, I think one might say, well, actually, that wasn't me. But under no condition argue the rightness or wrongness of an act. Now, if I've done something wrong, and I think the act was right, but it's upset the other person, it was wrong because it was a tactical error, even if it wasn't morally wrong. And I think the 3 types of things I'm making amends for: number 1, things which are out and out morally wrong; number 2, things which go against custom. So cross-sharing someone in a meeting of CA is not morally wrong, but it does breach custom, and there are all sorts of things which breach custom. So certain types of looseness are acceptable in certain social environments and utterly unacceptable in others. It really depends. And then you've got tactical errors. So if you've really upset someone, even if it was the right thing in theory, if it's upset them, you shouldn't have done it, and you can say, I shouldn't have done that. So, next point I want to bring up. This is not very linear, it's just points that arise in the order that they show up in the book. Oh, there was one thing about confessing ill feeling. It's very important to remember in Bill's story, Ebby says that he was to approach the people he hated and the people he'd harmed. This is significantly downplayed by the time you get to the step 8 and 9 instructions. I think they may have discovered through trial and error, or just through experience, that it really doesn't do well to go around telling people how you've been gossiping behind their back and how you've loathed them royally for the last 10 years and have told everyone so. I've had complete strangers try to make amends to me. It was the girlfriend of a sponsee. The girlfriend of a sponsee said, I've been bad-mouthing you to AA all over East London. I didn't even know who she was, and I certainly didn't know she'd been doing that. I don't want to know. People generally don't want to know. There's only one reference to making amends to people we are enemies of in the step 8 and 9 instructions, and that is it in one of the paragraphs I've just posted. And it's in a very specific context. It's enemies. It's people where there's open warfare. If there's open warfare, you can confess the ill feeling. But most such enmities and hatreds are actually undercover. The person might sniff that something is up, but you don't want to lift the lid of the bin and shove their head in it and say, take a good deep draught of this as you recount all of the ways in which you've loathed them. Don't do that. Don't lend their suspicion the evidence that it's looking for. You've got to come at it a different way. What else? Yes, it should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. Now, this is very interesting because we've got a clause in step 9, the get out clause, except when to do so would injure them or others. Now, it says the word injure, and note that Bill doesn't repeat words easily. What he'll do is use a synonym. It uses the word harm, and then he uses the word injury. I think we can take injury to be synonymous with harm. Elsewhere, when discussing this passage in the step, it says, provided we do not cause more harm by doing so. So harm and injury are the same thing. Now, if you bring up a harm that someone was aware of, you're not harming them by bringing it up. Harm or injury is the creation of something new, not the reminding of something past. Now, an awful lot of people I've met in the fellowship have said, well, I won't make amends for this, that, or the other, because they were very upset by the thing that I did, and if I bring it up, it will hurt them. And of course it won't. I mean, if that were true, then one couldn't make amends to anyone, because if one's harmed them, they will have been upset by it. If they were upset by it, you can't say, well, I can't make amends to the people I upset. That's saying I can't make amends to the people I've harmed. So you've now got out of all of your step 8 and 9. That would be a pretty fatal flaw in the design of the step if it gave you a get out which applied to every single harm. It's clearly not what they meant. What it talks about when you read the context in the literature as a whole is this: you don't create anything new. You don't, in other words, reveal things which are not already known about. Of course, to amend something, to apologise for something, you have to bring up the thing, but you don't tell people something they don't know already. That's the principle there. Now, in this case, the chap is rather upset at hearing the amend. He's not going to give the forgiveness. Now, it says to the person making the amend, you've done a very good job, well done. It doesn't say, oh, he was upset. Perhaps that's one you shouldn't have made. It's taking for granted that a percentage of the people that you make amends to are going to be upset. Perfectly natural. They're allowed to be. Now, I've made amends to people where I had to hold the phone like that because they were shouting so hard at me. And then I saw them at a meeting 6 weeks later. They were fine. They'd gotten over it. So that's part of their process, is to let it all out and then it settles down. Doesn't mean I did anything wrong because what you're doing, you're bringing out emotion which was there the whole time. You're not creating new emotion. People say that they don't want to make amends to usually exes because they don't want to reopen old wounds. Well, again, that would be a reason for not making amends to anyone under any circumstances, because unless you did the thing early this afternoon, necessarily it's an old wound. Now, this is why we have to be terribly careful with figurative language. Of course, you don't want to open an old wound, but that's not what is happening with the amend. What you're doing is you're cleaning a festering wound. You're cleaning a wound which was never cleaned and sewn up in the first place. You get the right image, and then you know what to do. Be very careful of imagery in recovery contexts because it can send you down the wrong path. So we do not dodge our creditors is the next thing. What one has to do is make a full list of all the people one owes, and they fall into 3 categories. Number 1, legal debts, ones where they'll send the bailiffs or get a county court judgment against you if you don't pay. Those tend to be associated with very high interest. If you pay off those quickly, that will stop the interest accruing and you'll be able to pay off the other people more quickly. So don't go to a friend and pay them off first when you still owe the bank. So first category is legal debts. Second category is people you owe who know about the debt, but they're not going to come after you legally. So that's friends and family. Well, they may no longer be friends, but people who were once friends and family. And then the third category is people you've harmed financially, but they don't know. Usually that's forms of theft or damage, or if people have defrauded the Inland Revenue or housing tax or something, housing benefit, something like that, where you owe the money, but the recipient, the potential recipient of the amend is not aware of it. You do the legal ones first, the friends and family second, everything else third. Now, what it says is arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. You see, the book does say to say we're sorry. Now, arranging the best deal we can in order not to hack off friends and family any more than is necessary. It can be, if you can get a moratorium on the interest, then and you get a deal where you're paying the legal debts off, to Argos and to the store cards and the credit cards, you're paying those off over, say, 5 years or something, you can start to approach the friends and family. But it's best to get the legal ones sorted out first, then you know how much left you have to play with. And also, to even work out how much you have to pay every month, you have available to pay, you've got to be keeping very good accounts. You need to be recording every penny, totting it up by category every month, seeing what costs are fixed, which are stepped, which are variable, which are really discretionary, which are frivolous. And then you can see what you can cut down, leaving, of course, something for pension and savings and contingencies, as one shouldn't be an idiot about this, in order that you can get a fair deal for everyone. If you don't know this, there are debt consolidation agencies you can go to, and they'll pool all of the legal debts into a single amount. And the creditors love this because they don't have to deal with you anymore. They've got a system, and they're done, you're done, keep up the payments, and you're good to go. Then you can start paying off friends and family. Next line. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. And it's very careful to say that we do not have rules for amends because every situation is potentially different. In practice, they fall into clear categories, but there are going to be exceptions the whole time. There are going to be all sorts of things that need to be taken into consideration. I said you can't injure someone or harm them by making an amend and referring to something that they know about. That doesn't mean, however, that you rub their noses in it, and sometimes one has to allude to things obliquely, particularly if the episode was particularly shameful or particularly painful or poignant for some other reason. And the motto is very good. It's someone gave this to me: specific but not explicit. You give enough information about the thing that you did so they knew what it was, so they know what it was, but without being lurid about it. So if you insulted someone, you don't repeat the insult. You don't say, when I called you a la. You say, when I insulted you. So often this question of upsetting people has got much more to do with the manner in which the amend is made, not the fact of it. Now, we're going to come back to this question of except when to do so would injure them or others. So the first situation in which you might injure them is by revealing new information. The second one is here. So what it says is, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we're willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. Now, the type of situation it's talking about here is where if you revealed what you did, if you made amends, you could cause to be instituted administrative proceedings, legal proceedings, prosecution, disciplinary proceedings in your occupational profession, such that you are sent to prison, you lose your job, you're unable to continue in a particular role. The very fact that that is in the offing means that someone else will be affected. The taxpayer is not helped if one more person is sent to prison. When it says usually, however, other people are involved, it's hard to think of a situation where the individual, if rendered unemployed or unemployable or sent to prison, is not going to thereby affect people simply by virtue of the work they're now unable to do and the fact that other people have to support them. So with these situations where one might, by revealing new information, cause one of these procedures to be launched, don't. Find another way. Now, there are exceptions. I do know people where the situation weighed so heavily on them that they actually did fess up. I know someone that went to prison for, I think it was armed robbery. And they went to prison for a number of years. And of course, God makes something good of it. So, they've used that experience in their later career, the sort of things that they've done. It's made them helpful. He himself is sceptical about whether it was on balance the right thing to do to take 5 years or whatever it was out of his life. And I tend to agree, particularly when you add up the cost to the taxpayer of the criminal justice system, of prison, of probation. That costs an arm and a leg, and other people have to work for that. So be careful. I'm told by a friend that stole from supermarkets. Now, she admitted to the supermarkets because they're not going to be personally hurt by the revelation. There are revelations which won't hurt someone. And she went and she paid money, I think, to charities supported by supermarkets. And that's what all the supermarkets did. Except with one of them, she phoned Marks and Spencer's, and they started to get very serious. And I think supermarkets which have a policy of always prosecuting shoplifters, even if they don't want to prosecute, as soon as they get wind of it and the call is recorded, they have to do it, or they themselves will be subject to a disciplinary procedure. So you've got to proceed very carefully with this sort of thing, not to fall foul of those, because no good is done by that. You find a way. With supermarkets as well, it says made direct amends to those we harmed. Now, when you steal from a supermarket, it's not the branch that is harmed, it's not the manager who is harmed, it's not the staff who are harmed, it's the shareholders of the supermarket that are harmed. They're the people to whom restitution is owed. And this is the case with lots of things. Same with benefit fraud, public assistance fraud. It's not the specific office, it's not the agency, it's the taxpayer. So the relief is to go to the taxpayer. One must do something which relieves the taxpayer of a burden the taxpayer would otherwise have. And typically the best way is to give to a charity whose work relieves the public burden. And then you're actually making direct amends to the people who are harmed, because the people who benefit most directly the taxpayers. There is I'm going to be terribly rude about speaker tapes, which is ironic given this is recorded, but there we go. If you listen to lots of speaker tapes on steps 8 and 9, you'll almost invariably hear people say, I went to my sponsor and said, can I make amends in writing? And the sponsor said to me, well, did you harm them in writing? And say, only if you harmed them in writing can you make amends in writing. I'm really not sure what the spiritual principle is there, other than eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The big book actually gives an example where someone is written to, so they didn't have a problem with it being in writing. I think there are at least 25 reasons why lots of amends should be in writing. A good thing to do the approach and make the amend in the letter. Offer a phone call or a meeting to follow up at the person's discretion. Some reasons why writing is best. If they're simply livid, often the only way to deliver the amend is to do it in writing. Then they have a chance to take it on board and calm down, and then they'll be reasonable. If you go straight in there and knock on the door, they're going to say things which spoil matters. They're going to feel guilty about that, and it's blocking any possibility of reconciliation. If it's done in writing and it's well written, it can have a gravitas to it, which a phone call or a physical meeting won't have. You can also, if you're not very good with words, and especially in these situations, even those who are good with words are bad with words, you can make sure you say exactly what is meant, and you don't say anything you don't mean to say or would regret afterwards. It also gives people the option to read it a dozen times. Now, I'm sure you've had the experience on text or WhatsApp. You write something and someone responds and it's clear they didn't read properly what you said and they've reacted. Now, when you've got that in writing, you can prove what happened. This happens the whole time in oral communications, but there's no evidence if it's not recorded. What people hear is what they think they've heard, even if they heard something quite different. If it's in writing, you can avoid those misunderstandings, and the misunderstandings can be considerable in an amend. So I think a lot of situations, the best way to approach someone respectfully, with some decorum, giving them the opportunity to read it properly, think it through, and decide how to respond without being put on the spot by you knocking on their door. That's the tactful and considerate way to approach people. And a few people have made amends to me over the years, and often they just grabbed me at a meeting. But sometimes they say, can we meet for coffee? And given what they did, I don't want to meet for coffee. I really don't. Um, and I say I'm happy, just put it in writing and we're good. And then they put it in writing. I don't want contact with everyone I've ever known. And people are like that with me. A lot of people simply don't want the contact. So don't insert yourself into their day. Now, you're not marching back into their lives, but you are inserting yourself into their day unbidden. If you're in contact with someone generally, or even occasionally, if there is an open if the lines of communication are open, absolutely, just call them up. But if they're not, you have to re-establish contact in a non-intrusive way, and I think that's the situation in which writing is a jolly good idea. Now, the next little bit is on the third situation where one is very careful, where except when to do so would injure them or others, and we avoid making the amend, or we have to do it indirectly or covertly, or at least very, very discreetly. And it's a situation of marital infidelity. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. Oh, just one thing on the letter. If it's an ex, and they're in a relationship with someone else, it's probably best that it's in writing, and you can make absolutely clear you're not trying to reinitiate anything, to reactivate any kind of contact. It's a one-off apology communication. Now, I'm imagining if my other half received a letter from his ex from 25 years ago, which clearly and systematically apologised for the ex's behaviour and said, I don't wish to intrude or disturb your relationship, I simply want to apologise for my bad behaviour, I would have no case against the gentleman making the amend or my ex. And it would be churlish of me if I went to someone and said, how dare someone apologise for things they did? There's no case. Now, if such a letter were to cause friction in a relationship, the relationship has got 6 months tops at best. Because there's clearly there's a fundamental problem. If you can't communicate with another human being in a perfectly reasonable way without causing huge amounts of jealousy and upset, there's a problem with the relationship. And that's not your problem. The problem's there already. Absolutely do it discreetly. Don't do it in an open postcard delivered to the person's address for the wife to read. Do it discreetly if you can. My aunt was in the habit of writing open postcards to my mother, berating her in the language that neither of them are English, but in English, so that the postman would read it and tell the whole village. So don't do it in an open postcard. Find some other way of doing it discreetly. And I've never heard of a situation, perhaps you have, I've never heard of a situation where someone's amend to an ex done discreetly and appropriately in an adult way, with gravitas, without emotion, without lots of outpourings and romantic reminiscences. I've never heard of that going wrong. I've never heard of that causing a problem. Some people systematically refuse to make amends to any of their exes on the grounds that, I don't know, letting bygones be bygones or something like that. So back to this point, marital infidelity. If we're sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? But it says we feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. So this is the third category. Our 3 categories. Don't reveal new information which is going to be hurtful to the person you're making amends to. Don't do something which will launch a process which will place you in a position where you are less helpful to the people around you. Thirdly, don't dob in or involve a third party. And what I love about the next bit is how it really gives you freedom to consult your own conscience. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, so no scripts, no formulas, we have often found this the best course to take. So there are innumerable situations, and you have to judge each one separately. Good generalship may decide, it says, that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk a face-to-face combat. The best example of this, in the first 15, 16 years of my recovery, I behaved like a very good son, but I hadn't. My mother was a force to be reckoned with. And she wasn't the easiest person for a dozen good reasons, which have mostly got to do with the Second World War in Europe. So, she's quite excused. But I hadn't dealt with that, and I was not fully. It hadn't been rinsed out of my system. And so her needling of me produced a reaction below the surface. Even though I continued to behave well, she knew that basically I found it difficult to spend much time with her. But the behaviour was right. How do you make amends for that? You make amends for that on the flank. You don't say, yes, you're absolutely right. For the last 16 years, I've only been coming to see you because it's the right thing and the duty, even though I frankly have dreaded it every single time. You don't admit that. Even though at some level she sensed that. Now, I didn't know how to make amends for this. The amends were made because I said to God, today is the day. It was going to be her 80th birthday. We were going down to see her. And I said to God, you're going to need to do this. You're going to need to amend this because I don't know how. And when she opened the door, I realised she was not the person I had taken her to be for the previous 40-odd years. She looked different. I had had the problem removed internally, and from that day onwards, literally from that day onwards, the relationship was resolved. It took a few years for the kinks to get worked out of it, but essentially that problem of my internal conflict being sensed by her was gone. God did it. If you place this in God's hands, God will do whatever needs to be done. If the thing can't be said, there is always a way to make amends, but you'll need to leave that to God. Now, amends to family. There are some good points here. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyse the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticise them. That means the only element of the past I'm to analyse is my behaviour. So listy, regret, done. What can I do differently in the future? That's a very good question. I've asked this question to my other half. Is there anything I should start doing? Is there anything I should stop doing? Is there anything I should do differently? And his answers have been surprising. There were things I wouldn't have guessed. Very helpful question. We also have this line, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator shows the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. So this gets fed into your step 11 morning routine. The spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. As expressed elsewhere in the book, this doesn't mean going on spiritual retreats, it means helping others. A sponsee of mine, quite a few sponsees have recently completed step 9, but one in particular, who I was speaking to today about this, he's just finished his amends, and I said to him, what effect has it had? He said, well, it's really weird. I've just got this real sense of urgency to get more sponsees. I didn't expect that, but I thought it's the best answer I've ever heard. There's nothing about his internal experience. What he's developed is a sense of responsibility. Now, I'm sure you'll come across the phenomenon of, what do they say, California sober. So no offence to anyone who's actually in California or from California, but certain so-called free lapses that one can get away with. Chief amongst which is the whole ayahuasca on a spiritual retreat in Puerto Rico number. And I've never heard anyone say, yes, I need to develop my sense of responsibility towards others and fulfill my obligations in society more diligently. And so I'm going to take ayahuasca because I think it will open my eyes to my derelictions. It's always after trying to crack the secrets of the universe. That's not what it's talking about when it says the spiritual life. One mustn't impose contemporary senses of spiritual on what they meant. And if you look at where the word spiritual is used in the book, again and again and again, it talks about the spiritual life is one of help of others. Later on in chapter 11, it says that Bill and Bob saw that they had to keep spiritually active, so they go to the local hospital and ask if there are any alcoholics there. It's not what you would expect. So living the spiritual life, of course one does step 11 if a retreat without ayahuasca helps, then of course go on it. But it's a means to an end, it's not an end in itself. Otherwise it becomes like people that learn to live on a train and never get out at the destination. They're just stuck on platform 9 3/4. What else have we got? And we're almost at the end of this, mercifully. So there may be some wrongs we can never right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. Cannot be seen covers a myriad of situations. Now, if you make an approach and they don't respond, you send the letter and you're done. Now, I given to understand in Orthodox Judaism, if you attempt to make amends 3 times and you're rebuffed 3 times, the guilt for the sin passes from you to them. Very interesting. So I'm not held hostage by someone else's refusal to receive an amend. And this is terribly important within AA because people get upset with each other the whole time. And there are all sorts of amends and apologies, major and minor, which take place. If someone offers to make amends, you absolutely can. If you don't want to meet them, it's fine. Say, well, put it in writing, but to accept it with grace, and then it's over. Not to hold the other person hostage with your high dudgeon at the thing that they did, refusing to accept the amend is very bad form, because you may need, if for no other reason, you may need the person in 10 years' time. You can't go around making enemies in recovery. It just won't do. Now, on this question of the wrongs we can never fully right. Most wrongs can't be righted at all. If you've hurt someone, you can't take the hurt away. You can pay back money, you can mend a fence, but most things you can't. What we're really doing is undoing the rupture in the relationship between us and them by us having failed to admit the wrong promptly and clearly and with contrition. Because there's the harm done, and then there's the harm to the relationship caused by not apologising for it, and that goes on forever. And it's very rare that this is the case, but there's 1 or 2 people in recovery where the behaviour was very public and very unseemly, and I don't bear them a grudge at all. I wish them well, and I hope they get well and stay well. But we're not going to be chums until there's an acknowledgement of what happened. If they acknowledge what happened, even however badly they do it, fine. Then I'll start to be more friendly. At the moment, there's a polite civil distance. And I think a lot of people were like that with me. I needed to apologise before they could resume normal relations, because there was an elephant in the room, which was my non-apology, my non-recognition of what I'd done. And step 9 shoots the elephant in the room. With the people that you can't find, You keep a list. Once a year, you attempt to trace them. You put your thinking cap on. I've even hired, not hiring an agency makes it sound very dramatic, but I paid money. You can pay money, particularly in the States, to trace people, and you get this sort of 400-page report, and you find out all sorts of very interesting stuff. And I paid $100 for one of these reports, and I found the person after 27 years. I got a couple of clues. The clues would not have been available at any time in the past. A website was published which had a particular piece of information, which was the missing piece, because their surname had changed. And I found them after 27, 28 years, and it was my best friend from when I was at school in another country, and we're on absolutely the best of terms. We stay with them every summer. We're very good friends with the whole family now. And I kept trying every year until I found him. There have been others where it's 29 years, 30 years, where things happened. If ever you get a hunch, if God ever seems to say to you, look now, go and research now, do it now. Because very often I found things through some intuitive thought. I think to look for this, I think to look for that. I find someone through a chain of 3 or 4 people. And I've taken up those opportunities, and I've knocked almost everyone off the list. There's a very small number. With the ones you can't see, write a letter, go to a church, read it out in the church as if to the person, and you're done. But keep looking once a year. Last little bit. We don't delay if it can be avoided. The only time you delay is when there's a question of order. The order in which you make the amends. Sometimes, if you make amends to Sally before Susan, Susan, frankly, is owed the amend first. There was a greater ill there, and you're going to cause an even greater problem by running around making little small amends. So you do have to think about the order in which these things are done. That's the only reason for delay, but that just switches things around. Once you're prepared, let's say you were all prepared. With sponsees, we prepare a few, they make a few, we prepare a few, they make a few. But if you had them all prepared, you could do the lot in 2 weeks. I made 80 in 9 days, I think. That was a second run of amends. The first run was a bit slower. That was about 6 weeks. So you can do it quickly. We'll have none of this in God's time. Be very wary of spiritual sayings or interpretations of lines in the big book which leave you with nothing to do. So, for instance, it's progress, not perfection, nothing to do. It's only a suggestion, nothing to do. I'll make the amend in God's time, nothing to do. We're not saints, nothing to do. Beware of those. I've told this story before, but it's so apropos here, if you'll forgive me telling it again. A rabbi takes his coat to a tailor's and says, "Can you mend the coat?" And the tailor says, "Absolutely. God willing, it'll be ready tomorrow." And the rabbi comes back the next day. The coat's not ready. He says to the tailor, "When will it be ready?" The tailor says, "It'll be ready, God willing, tomorrow." Comes back the third day. Coat's still not ready. The rabbi says, "When will it be ready?" He says, "God willing, it will be ready tomorrow." And the rabbi says, "And if we leave God out of it?" It's perfect. So none of this nonsense from the 12 and 12 of the sort of no never list. Just one has to, if you'll pardon the sexist phrase, man up or woman up or person up. One has to person up and just get on with it. As with anything else in recovery, one doesn't have to want to do it. One has to be willing to do it. Now, if you can want to do it, all the better. But I didn't want to make lots of my amends. They were wretched. They were embarrassing. I was physically shaking. I vomited after one of them. They're not comfortable. once you've done them, they're fine. And actually, you get onto a roll, you sort of wish there were more to make because you get a little bit of a high out of them. but but if you make the doable ones first, the undoable ones, the unfaceable ones, I made amends to someone who I think it can safely be said was physically abusive to me as when I was a child. Now, they were underage themselves, but they were much more powerful in lots of ways. Now, I did that person wrong, but I made amends to them. I did not want to do that, but boy, am I glad I did. I stopped having nightmares about school when I made that amend, and they never came back. So one really must have a go at everything. Now, it's time, if Keith, you don't mind me doing the introduction, for some questions and answers. So send them through in the chat because this is recorded. Let's see what we've got. First one, is it important or irrelevant to mention we're in recovery before we approach to make amends? As I said, if the harm was drinking related, it can lend credibility. If you did something absolutely rotten when you were sober, don't advertise that as the behaviour of someone that was 7 years sober. You don't go near AA. But even if it was when we were drinking, it can distract. And a friend of mine made amends to someone in AA. They're the worst. If people think you make amends to someone in recovery, in CA and AA and Al-Anon, bound to be plain sailing. None of it. You'll get the weirdest responses from people in recovery. Someone formulaically said to another AA member, I won't get over my drinking until I do my utmost to straighten out the past. Now that's straight from the book. And the chap said to the amending person who was 2 years sober, "You're still drinking, are you? I thought you'd gotten over it." Nice little sarcastic response to a perfectly good-natured but ill-judged approach. You can brace yourself. If you're making amends to people in recovery, brace yourself. You never know what you're going to get. If you pray and don't go by formula, don't do painting by numbers, you'll get a sense of whether it's appropriate or not, and a couple of nasty shocks in the early ones will probably set you on the right track. Being amazed before halfway through. This is a reference to step 9. Was this true for you? Yes. There we go. What I was mostly amazed by was the fact that the story of what really happened had little to do with what I thought happened. Now, of course, the other person may be distorting a little bit. I suspect I was the greater distorter of the memory. The person who does the harm usually distorts more than the person who receives the harm. People say you can't change the past. Well, you can. If the past is my notion of what happened, that notion can be changed by facing the reality. I used to say I had a terrible childhood. Now, some terrible things happened. I remember saying to my mother when I was in my 30s I had a terrible childhood. She said, "Oh, ridiculous, you had an idyllic childhood." And I thought, are you on the same planet as me? I didn't argue, but I thought, oh, delusion. I've come round to thinking I had an idyllic childhood with some bad patches. It was amazing in all sorts of ways I was unable to appreciate at the time, so I think it does change the past. Is there any problem with using a template letter that is adjusted for each amend? Absolutely not. The problem is following a fixed formula and not doing the adaptation or the adjustment. As long as you adjust it so it sounds like you wrote it. I mean, if you don't sound like Jane Austen, then don't use a template which makes you sound like Jane Austen. It's got to be in your own voice. But of course, you're saying similar things to similar people, so adapt. But as long as it feels like a natural thing you would say, as it must be considered and careful and come from the heart. Next one. If I've apologised in the past sincerely, do I go back and make another amends? No, I don't. Now, it depends what you mean by sincerely. If you apologise sincerely, but it was all sort of drunken and tear-ridden, then you might want to have another general amend to cover all such situations. But some people are never going to like me. I think I may have said this before. I've had dinner once with a lot of people, so a very small number have gone on to suggest we meet a second time. Not a few people are going to like you a lot. Most people are going to be indifferent, and a few people will dislike you. I think it talks about that in the 12 and 12. Now, the mistake is thinking because you've apologised, you're all going to be best friends. Now, people might be now neutral because you've made amends, but I've known people that go around remaking amends again and again and again and again and again as a way of somehow trying to deal with their own low self-worth, or trying to curry favour with family members who are damn well sick of them making amends. And this person I'm thinking of, the poor thing actually went round making amends for making amends. There was a round of amends for making. Don't do that. If you've done it properly once, then you're done. If there's any sense it might not have been taken well because you were not in a fit state to give a proper apology, then you might want to look at it again. God, I think, will tell you. And someone's added to this, I attempted to make amends twice with my brother, and both times was a no. What next? He is definitely the biggest one I feel needs to be done. You see, this is the interesting thing. The approach, one might have said to the person, I'd like to make amends, and the brother says, no. Well, he's not allowed to do that. He's allowed to say, I don't want to meet you, or talk to you, or anything. But nothing is going to stop me from sending someone a letter. And they can tear it up if they want, but they can't stop me sending it. I'm going to make my demonstration. I remember there was a AA member. Actually, no, we haven't got time for that story, but it's a great one. Anyway, next question. What if the other person was abusive and may still be dangerous? Well, you see, I had one of these. It was an ex of mine. It was an ex from when I was drinking, so they were quite the production number as well. And the last time we had spoken before the amend, he'd said, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. Now, he was a German teacher from Sheffield. It was very unlikely that he was actually going to do that. There are threats and there are threats. Now, it depends what one means by abusive. That can cover 1,000 things. It depends what is meant by dangerous. One isn't going to move back in with them. If they're stalky, then that's a different question. If someone was a stalker and it's quietened down, then you don't reignite that. You don't risk reigniting that. And that's the same with all sorts of people who are psychotic, schizophrenic. You have to be a little bit careful because you're not dealing with someone who is of sound mind and healthy. With someone who was abusive, if there was an abusive relationship, it's likely the most sensible way to approach them would in any case be in writing, and a letter can be sent in writing in a way that you can't be contacted back. Now, ideally, one is contactable back, but I can certainly see situations where one would want to avoid that. I've thought that people were dangerous when they weren't, and then other people were genuinely dangerous. So my fear, however, clouded my judgment as to whether there was genuine danger. I've never heard of anyone being harmed on an amend. I have heard of people being harmed on a 12th step call. That's a slightly different situation. So one has to judge whether uh, the amend as proposed would actually pose any danger or whether it would just be extremely unpleasant. And a letter is a good way out in those situations, but each situation must be judged on its own merits. How would one make amends for damaging property, a car, for example, and the victim simply isn't known or traceable? There's the proxy charity payment. Now, I haven't got time for the full background story, but when I was 17, I was exploring a castle in Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein, where I accessed this secret passage in a tower, which led me to another part of the building where there were grand pianos and there was ballet music on the piano, and there were also these huge jars full of formaldehyded animals. It was the most extraordinary. How that could be in a ballet school, I don't know. Is it Germany? What can I say? Uh, but I stole the piano reduction, which would have been used in ballet rehearsals of Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet, because I wanted to play it, because I play the piano. And I hauled that bloody thing round with me for years. Every time I saw it, I thought, and I could never trace the castle. You'd think that description would be enough to go on. Apparently not. I couldn't pin down where the hell this was. And the situation was, there was no way of tracing it. I'd been in a military band again. I won't tell you why I was in a military band, but I was a military bandsman. And I couldn't trace it. So I found a ballet school in London and just gifted them some money to buy music with. And they were very pleased. I didn't say why I was doing it. I just said, here's some money. There you go. So proxy amends. Unfortunately, if one does trace them, one can't say, well, I've already given the money to charity, so I'm not going to pay you back. No, you have to pay them back twice. But that won't do any harm whatsoever. And I think that's all the questions we have. So that's it from me, Keith.